Hey, welcome to Wonderland, the Rise of the New Beginning Breakdown Case Study Part 2. My name is Mr. Popo, and we are Popo. In this Part 2 of the case study, we're gonna take a deep dive inside of After Effects to see how Scene 1 was done and the technique that have been done, as well as Scene 2 and Scene 3. Without further ado, let's get right into it. So, Scene 1, we have basically this hand rising, and the knowledge is gonna come out, the connection is gonna happen, the exchange of information, then we have a transition which all the knowledge is gonna branch in together to illuminate the investor. That's great. Now, let's see one thing by one thing, shall we? Well, the one thing for sure when you enter this project and see how it was done, it could be scary, it could be frightening, or it could be intimidating how complex it is and each thing has a lot of effects. So it could be really intimidating, but when you're working and you have a certain workflow, an idea of how things is going to work, which is why part 1 is really important, these things, they just flow in and you don't really feel it until you have this complicated project, which to a creator makes a lot of sense. But to an outsider, it needs a little bit of context. So let's make things a little bit clear. So the first thing I started animating is the hand. And as you can see, the hand is going to be very simple. So we have a very simple background and we have some fingers here and there. I'm just going to take off the background so that we can focus on the hand. So basically it's these two. And I would like to apologize beforehand. I'm going to go with quarter resolution because anything on top of that will completely slow the process of recording this tutorial and going fast. So we have the two hands, the two fingers, and I believe we have other fingers, I hope so at least, which is the hand right here and the thumb. So as you can see, it's very simple. The only thing that I really animated, of course, the puppet, position and rotation. The puppet is just to give it that very organic look, but without it, this is how it's going to look like if we just look at this one here. And so for that part, as you can see, it's just very straightforward. Cool. But then once we do the puppet, you see there is that little bit of secondary animations, that little bit of life, you see, that goes into the hand rather than just being straight position on rotation. So that's where Puppet Tool came in. So Puppet Tool is basically just putting some points and then just animating them. All right, well, that's not really good, isn't it? Of course, I had a hand control above all. The hand control, what it does is it brings in the hand up or it brings it down. So everything is just following this hand. So if I try to control anything, that's what's just going to happen. As you can see, it's basically just position and rotation as well. Cool. Now that we discussed that, the next thing that I've done was I worked on what happens between the two interactions between the hand and the sphere of knowledge. So the first thing that you might really pay attention to is these guys right here. Let's just look at the wisp dark, which is this one, and then I think we have even more wisp dark, unless I'm wrong, and I think I'm wrong. Yeah, cool. So what happened here, as you can see, it's a little blobs. All right, let's just go to auto. Cool. So now you can see, but it's going to be very slow, which is the problem. So what happened here is I have the main dark blob and I have some secondary ones that I created out of shape layers. So let's look at these. So it's a bunch of shape layers, and without all the effect, this is how it's going to look. So it's a trim pad of a trail. And then what I do is I warp these, as you can see here. So without it, this is how it's going to look like. But when I warp, this is what it's going to look like. All right, so it's a little bit more organic. So I put a bunch of them, so it's just linear color key, and I added a lot of blur between them to give that sense of depth to the composition. You have even more blobs, as you can see here. See, so without the effects, it's just going to look like a little sphere that just goes up and then disappears. But with the effect, with the Bezier warp, which is this one right here, I can warp how things go, and of course you can animate the bulge, you can animate the Bezier warp. So as you can see here, so the bulge is how fat or how thin you make things. Bezier warp is how you warp them to make them look like water. I could have used turbulent displace, I understand, but the issue with turbulent displace is you have no control over how your displacement is going to be. It's easier to do it by hand, which is Bezier warp. The same thing goes for the last one. So the last one is the same thing. We had a bulge, we had a Bezier warp, and there we go. Cool. So that's when it comes to this entire blob, which is cool. It is really important to mention mention the effect of the CC, the color correction layer, the adjustment layer. So I had a bunch of things here. We're gonna touch on this a little bit later. So we have a camera lens blur. Okay, so I have this blur map, which is this one right here. So let's just look at this. This is a blur map. So whenever I want to change the focus of the camera lens blur, the only thing that I would do is I would just animate this gradient ramp. Then I will animate that accordingly, as you can see here. So if we just focus on this one, so you can see that I change the focus depending on what I want to tell. So in the beginning, I don't really need too much focus, so I unfocus it and then I start to focus back. Another thing I did was a fast blur. Yeah, that was used here, as you can see. And with the help of camera lens blur, it just makes the blur look more realistic. The optics compensation, these two here, were used at the end to intro and outro the scene. Here you can see without it, this is how it's going to look like. So I'm just going to turn this off too. So without it, this is how it's going to look like. It's basically very stale. There is nothing happening. I don't really feel the movement. It looks like it's just playing. So that's what's going on without these two. And then we have this. And as you can see, it's very, very stale compared to the end result. So as you can see here, once we get into the bubble, we have this field going like we're going inside. But still, it doesn't really give that feeling of like, I'm really feeling this merge. So to feel the merge, we need to rotate things. So am I gonna go to each and every layer and start rotating them? Doesn't make sense, isn't it? I mean, it's not practical. So what we do in that case, we bring in the transform. So this transform effect is basically everything that you have: position, rotation, scale, and this is all this, but in an effect. And when you put this in an adjustment layer, what means is when you rotate something, everything is going to rotate with it. When you scale something, the entire scene where the adjustment layer is affecting will get affected. So you can go crazy about this, depending on how creative your mind is and how wild it is. So as you can see here, what I did in my case, I made sure I use it where, for example, here, you see, so everything is rotating and the optics compensation and CC lens are working, doing their work. You see, so it makes it feel like these are actually coming into the screen. You see that? Yeah. You see, they're coming into the screen. That's the effect of CC lens and optics compensation together. So now that we rotated, we actually felt the merge, which is great. And then we're gonna zoom everything. So instead of, again, doing it to a null and parenting and stuff like that, all I do is put it on an adjustment layer and everything will scale together. You see that? So without this, that's how it looks like. Without optics compensation, that's how it looks like. With optic compensation, it looks more cinematic and it looks like it's actually coming into the screen. All right, now let's dive a little bit the details. So there was something in the hand. I believe there was a little bit of things here and there. So this is a shine, this is a shine as well. So I think, yeah, these are the ones that I wanted to talk about. So here what happened was I used the new thing. Well, apparently to me it was new, which is inside of the shape layers now. If you go inside of them and inside stroke, you can now put your tapers. So I just used 50 and 50 to make them look smooth. And then I run trim pad. Cool. And a deep glow to just make things glow beautifully. So the only thing that I did was I traced where they will go and I masked where I don't really need to see them. That's it. Same for the star touch. So for the star touch, we have a light here and a light here. Boom, gray. Now we have a ring pulse, which is this one. Boom. Okay. So here you will see that there is a little bit of distortion, and that's what this is about. So what is using a map ripple. So if we go inside, I just created two shape layers. Like this. So if we look at just one, it's basically just a ring. The ring without anything looks like this, but with the effect stacked, fractal noise to add a little bit of texture, box blur so that you can, blur things, and turbulent displays to make the shape a little bit more interesting than just circle. And you just duplicate them both to have a better ripple, because a ripple is a lot of circles each after another. So that's what happened here. That's why you can see that there is a ripple going on. Yeah, that's what gives the effect of like this has been touched. So that is when it comes to the line, to the blobs, to the transform effect, to the color correction, and the hand animation, and the shine. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Well, we have many elephants in the rooms, and one of them is this thing. So how did we use those animation of this thing here? So this is the scene without any color correction, without anything. So you can see that there is a null rotating, and then you have that thing rotating as well. Cool. So this is the scene. Now let's see what's going on. We have a null object. So what I did, I started with this. I drew the path using a null object position. So basically all this was done manually. Once I'm done, I went and I made sure that my particular is actually, this position is linked to this position. And now, if we just remove this, there we go. So my particles are just going straight. Now, let's just focus on the particles only. These are the particles without any effect, without anything going on. All right. So we just have these, and they just go in. And basically just a very simple particle setup where I just have a continuous particles and I choose when to end them at the end here. So I just switch it off. There is no more particle coming in. We do have, it's very simple, velocity. The reason I did velocity is I want them to go away. So you can see the velocity for motion is 24. Each particle would just follow the position that it came from. So there we go. So they're going to be pushed just a little bit and they're just going to die. And of course, needless am I to say that I actually played with the size over life. As you can see here, they are 0 size. They grow all the way up and then they start dying. And that's what this graph means. So basically that's what happened here. And the motion blur is on. So that is cool. But I needed these to be a little bit more stylized. So what I did was I ran a bunch of experiments and this is what I came up with. So I did a CC glass. Now, I'm not sure if you can see clearly here, but I'm just going to go here so that you can see the detail of the last part. This is what's happening. It's like you have this little bit of a texture going on. So what's going on here? CC glass basically make things look a little bit glassy, like the glass effect, but I use it in a very different way, whereby it's more of a displacement, but I still need that highlight here. Displacement would not give me that. Displacement will just smudge the particles, but it would not give me the highlights between each displacement. And that's why I use CC glass and not displacement map. And CC glass, I'm using fog, which is basically this texture. So After Effects is using this texture to displace and highlight, blobalize, like coming from blob, to make things look more blobby, more displaced and textured, highlighted. That worked well for me. And then I went and I added a deep glow so that, you know, they just glow a little bit, just go. Obviously, I played with these in the beginning, but yeah, I just turned out I didn't want that to happen at all. And then I just duplicated this layer. And what I did was I just went really ham on the value of literally everything. So these are the normal particles. And then I added a lot of radial blur, as you can see here. And then I added some chromatic aberration to separate these things and give me a little bit of depth. I did a turbulent displace to make these flow even more organically. The CC glass is increased heavily, and then a glow, and there you go, you have it. So you have a scene where all this will just flow in together organically. Now that is part one. What's going on in part two of this effect? The part two is the filling up here. So we have this wisp right here. And what's going on is that it's just going to disappear. And to disappear, I'm not using opacity, but I'm using CC image wipe. So that's a little bit different. If we try to take an example here, so let's just take this one here. And I'm just going to put this here, bring it here, and I'm going to use CC image wipe. Cool. Before I use CC image wipe, I just want to see the difference between CC image wipe and opacity. And opacity, you're just going to go evenly together. All the image, all the values, doesn't matter. They all together go down. So that is opacity. The reason I didn't use opacity is that if I use CC image wipe, the CC image wipe will use the image in itself as a way to reveal. So the highest point will disappear the fastest, and the darkest point will disappear the last. You see? So it's way better than dissolving with opacity. And of course you can use something else. So I could just bring in another picture and then just put it in. So for example, I'm just going to bring in this guy here. I'm just going to put this guy there. And I could literally just use this guy as a catalyst, as you can see here. You see? So you disappear an image according to another image. Let's get back to scene 1. I just made that disappear using CC image wipe. Now let's look at these here. So let's forget about this. So what's going on here? As you can see again, we have the white things coming in with CC image wipe. And in the same time, I'm twirling this. So let's focus on just this. So twirling is this thing here, which is like a tornado. And because of the sphere was rotating, I wanted to simulate that rotation with a twirl. It's like things are mixing in faster in a rotation. So as you can see here, CC image wipe with twirl did the effect. Great. But then we needed a little bit of these. So what's happening here? This is being revealed, but I took this brush, I animated it. And the brush keeps animating, as you can see. Now, I used this brush and I went and I did a puppet tool. So instead of it being straight, so this is how it's going to look like straight. Okay, so let's just put this guy right here. So this is how the brush looks like. But with the puppet tool, this is what it looks like. So you see what happened here? It's a straight one, but with a puppet tool, it rotates and it gives me that organic turning thing. So I just used this for a bunch of them, and that's what happened basically. Now, the biggest one, which is how this got filled. Well, basically, I didn't really do much here. The only thing that I did was I took these particles that we've done, like this one here. I literally took them and I made them way bigger inside. And I just made sure that they only appear when it's inside the dark wisp. That's it. So then what we have is this bunch of filling up as it goes in. Cool. And then like, pring. Cool. Now the last big elephant of scene 1, which is this big tunnel absorption. So let's go into it, which is particle 1. So this is a very basic particle setup, and I'm just gonna turn off everything else and let's just focus here. So what's happening here is just a particle explosion, nothing more, nothing. That's it. Just as it is. But the key thing here was inside of the shading. So the shading here, I went inside it, and inside of Shadowlet from main, you can see that I added this thing here. So without it, this is how blunt this particle is going to look like. But with it, that's what happens here. So what I did was I colored the shade, not black, but I colored it according to the color palette that I had in that scene. And as you can see, the particles here are blue. So what goes with it is obviously purple or something reddish. So that's what I went for. So I added the opacity a little bit more. I didn't want too much. I just wanted just a little bit, just a touch, just the size of these shadows, as you can see here. You can even adjust the distance where this shadow come from. So since this is the center, so I just left it as it is. Basically, that's all about this. And the particle just, you know, again, size over life. They appear from small and they just die after that. Now, how do we stylize all this? So I added a radial blur a little bit. So it gives me this effect of like they're about to explode, as you see here. Okay, so without it, they're gonna look very simple, but with it, it gives that stretch look. Now, I added a little bit of turbulence. So as you can see here, turbulence. So it gives that organic, watery look, because remember, in the teaser, the next scene is scene number 2, which is the water scene. So it starts normally and then it goes as water. The turbulence increases. Now I added the CC glass, the same thing, you know, to give it that texture. So I just added that texture to keep it in line with the kind of particles that we did before. A little bit of deep glow never hurts. They're glowing, which is pretty big. And we have the twirl. The twirl again is this thing that just rotates everything. And since we're gonna again rotate, so I just wanted to give it this whirling thing that I cannot get from rotation. Now combine everything together, this is what we have. The transform is scaling and rotating in the same time, so it gives me this. So literally that was it for scene 1. For scene 2, that's what we're gonna see on the next tutorial. We're gonna dive into scene 2, and if we have time, we'll dive into scene 3 as well. I just want to thank you for staying until the end. Make sure you like and subscribe if you like this tutorial. It helps a lot with the algorithm reachability. And thanks to all my Patreons for keeping the support regardless of what I'm going through. I really appreciate it. So again, if you want to check the project file and get all the assets and everything, you can just go into my Patreon. Thank you very much. My name is Mr. Popo and we are Popo. I'll catch you on the next one.